Rucks.
Today, we are talking about the big boys, and not the ball boys, big boys. We're talking ruckman, the big fellas, tapping it down to the mids, and today we're going to discuss our favourite options. This is the ball boys. Let's go!
Hodge has done it from nowhere. Busted the goal from inside the 30. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty.
G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. Today, like we said, we're talking about the ruckman, the big fellas. We've got two of them in our AFL fantasy team, and yet we're going to spend just as long talking about those two positions as we are every other position because there's a lot to discuss. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Luke Rogerson. How are you, my friend?
Good, mate. I had fun doing my ruck research in preparation for this podcast because there were a few things I was just taking for granted that I think might spice up the debate a little bit.
I think this position and these two positions are going to shape everyone's team more dramatically than any other position in the preseason. Despite there being only two of them, I feel like in my team there's been 5, maybe 6 players go through these two spots. Guess who is sitting at R1 for me right now? I think it might take you by surprise.
You've had the big X-Meister.
He's been in there at times.
All pre-season, I would have thought. So I'm going to say, is it TDK?
No, I've gone the other T. I've gone Tim English sitting in there at R1 right now.
I feel sick.
But yeah, it's a position that I think you can talk yourself into a number of different directions with a few value options, some expensive options, and maybe some that are in between. So yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. We're going to talk about all of the options starting at the top. Should we get stuck into the number one averaging player from last season, Rowan Marshall?
Let's do it.
Let's talk about him. So first of all, he's Gawn.
Oh, nice.
He's a really, really good player. He is, I would say, of everyone in the game, he is the number one most reliable scoring option when given the right role. He has just had a history of scoring big scores when he's the number one ruckman. In fact, I've gone over his entire career when he's played more than 70% CBAs, which you'd expect a solo ruckman to play. For his entire career, 61 games, he's averaged 115.
It's fucking nuts.
It's huge. Like, this guy's not been doing it just for the last 2 years. There were signs of this. Like, he is incredible in terms of how he scores. He tackles, he gets hit outs, he gets marks, he gets disposals, he kicks goals. He can do it all. So he's expensive. Why aren't we starting him? Why are people hesitant?
Well, they're hesitant for the big price tag, and obviously at the start of the year, if you do happen to drop a stinker, it's impactful. The thing with Rowan Marshall, when you consult the table indicating toughness, or the tit, as it's affectionately known, you see that he's got one of the best.
He has a great run.
He's got a very good tit, 6-game tit.
Yeah.
So
this is not gonna. It's not gonna take off.
I think it will.
I think it will.
We're gonna take it to the moon.
Yeah.
So I think in his first 6 games, he has two teams that are extra green, one team that's semi-green, and the remaining teams are just neutral matchups. So there's nothing tough on the tit at all.
No, there's no tough titties.
So how immature can we get? The other thing about these guys priced at this point as well, they don't necessarily need to outperform their priced at figure when they're in this extreme echelon, because for them to be valuable, if they just go within sort of like 5 points of that one sort of 15 that they're priced at, it's still a pretty good pick to get you started.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's hard to do better than 117. I mean, it has been done, but not frequently, and especially not in the ruck line. Like, he's 5 points away, I think, from Brodie Grundy, who had 122 as the highest averaging ruck season of all time. So there's limited room to improve.
Yeah.
There is room to improve, though, because he had a game last year where he had a bit of a knee injury. A lot of people thought he was going to get subbed out early. He didn't. He fought on and played out that game, scoring, I think he had like a 70 or something like that. There was a game where he got schooled by Max at one point, scoring a 60 right in the midst of him going on a massive stretch. But he is like you said, great run. He has an excellent bye round. He's that round 13 bye, which is just St Kilda and just Freo. No early bye, obviously. He seems to be matchup proof as you can kind of get. A lot of the talk about Tristan Xerri, who we'll talk about in a second, is at the end of the year he had a lot of great matchups. Rowan Marshall was almost the opposite. He actually went up against some tough matchups and still was pumping out big scores. Plus, his backup ruckman is gone. There's no Tom Campbell. I say a little bit that's a little bit glossing over the truth there because...
It never eventuated anyway.
No, well, he did play. There were times that, there was a 50% CBA game where Campbell was in there but then got subbed out.
The guy averaged 117.
The thing is, though, right, if you're a team and you're getting Tom Campbell into your side and sacrificing Rowan Marshall to go forward at all, that tells me you want to get Rowan Marshall forward if you're putting Tom Campbell in there. Because let's not get it twisted that Tom Campbell is a good player. Shout out to Tom. Actually, have you heard the story about him and his retirement or attempted retirements the last few years? No. Apparently, the last two years, he's got a new job, signed a contract for a new job, walked in, first day, he gets a new contract at a different club, at Melbourne or St Kilda, so he's had to quit the job on day one. So
it's a fair excuse, but sorry.
It's a fair excuse.
I'm going to be at AFL.
But this guy is literally trying to retire, but he just keeps getting pulled back in.
That's good.
So the fact that he's no longer there, I don't necessarily think it's a good thing because there's a lot of talk about them signing a new SSP ruckman, which in all likelihood is actually probably going to be a bigger threat than I think Tom Campbell was. So I don't think that argument personally holds a lot of weight, that he's now no longer has the risk of someone coming in and pinch hitting the ruck more than last season.
He's not currently at the Oxlongs, but I'll try and play devil's advocate with you a little bit. Does it scare you at all that these kind of guys can potentially get away from you? Let me paint the scenario for you. So in the first 5 games of last season, he goes at 119.
Massive.
In the first 5 games.
Yep.
Then he drops 62 and 73 in consecutive weeks, and all of us are licking our lips. We're going to get this guy cheap. He's going to drop. The break even obviously goes up, but then what does he come out and do? 117, 164, 171.
Yeah.
And his price would have barely moved at that point.
Yeah.
Does that scare you at all?
Funnily enough, I think that's a lot of the time where people were trading him out, which hurts a lot. He has that scary ceiling, where he can, when it all comes together, he kicks goals, he tackles, he marks, he can do it all. And a 170 is not out of the question. Like back-to-back 160s is rarefied air. So yes, there is a world where if he, and the way he ended the season, if I just rattle off from round 13 onwards, 107, 105, 119, 106, 150, 118, 135, 131, 140, 131, 110. That is an incredible stretch to finish the season, going, how many games is that? 11 tons in a row. The last 11 games averaging 123 points.
He's doing this in a team that has, am I right in saying they have the least ruck contest?
Second least. I think Essendon just got below them, but yeah. There's only upside.
Well, that's what does that scare you? Is that
I think that encourages
sustainable,
me.
Or does it encourage? Yeah.
It encourages me because there's no there's only room for that to improve, in my opinion. So him scoring as well as he I think it'd be, if it was the opposite, if they were the second highest ruck contest team, that would scare me because there's only room to go down. Like a Tim English this season before, Bulldogs were right at the top there. They came back down. He's got nowhere really to go down. Unless someone comes in and interrupts and changes his role and he's sharing the ruck role a little bit more. The interesting thing that has me hesitating a little bit is, so he's obviously one of the better transition scoring ruckmen. Gets a lot of his score from transition compared to other ruckmen like a Tristan Xerri or a Max Gawn. Is the addition of someone like Jack McRae, adding in Philippou into the midfield, players who we expect to see an increase in their scoring output. Does that affect, it sounds weird because he's a ruckman, but does that affect his scoring from a transitional scoring point of view, do you think?
It is actually a pretty interesting argument, I think, because there's every case to say that Rowan Marshall's a midfielder who gets 30 extra points a game.
He gets an extra 30 hitouts, yeah.
And I don't have an answer to the question either, but I think it's a good one to ponder. I
think it's something that you can point to say, okay, even if he has the same role, it might be enough to drop him down from a 117 averaging player to a 110.
Yeah.
Which, again, not disaster, but if you knew that going into the season, you probably wouldn't start with him. So, and the other thing just flying in the face of starting him is I think Selby's put out this stat that no team since his winning season in 2017, I think outside of the person who tied with him his second year when he started Tom Mitchell, has started someone priced over 116. I think Jack McRae is that player that someone did start who was at 116. So that rules him out. He would have to go against that trend. I think he's capable of it because of just the sample size of what we have when he is playing that number one ruck role, the solo ruck role, that he's just a 115 guy. And I think that's pretty bankable. I think also this season, St Kilda play a lot of early games at Marvel, whereas in previous years it's been flipped. They played a lot of late games at Marvel. And if we read those stats out, those last 11 games where we went 123, basically 9 out of those 11 games were at Marvel. So whether that correlates with him scoring better, sometimes I struggle to see that causation versus correlation for grounds, but it's something to consider.
Let's talk about his big dog mate at the top there, because
Xerri.
He's a guy that's been getting around in a lot of teams. He's been getting around at the Oxlongs and at Mitch.
Very highly owned, yeah.
Throughout the preseason as well. But digging into his stats a little bit today, it didn't concern me so much, but it just made me think a few different ways about it. So one that I want to throw at you is, in the first 10 games of the season, he averaged 101.
Yeah.
So if he averaged 101, that's a failed pick.
It's not a great pick, no.
It's a bad pick. So in that 10-game stretch, he averaged 101 with 7.4 tackles. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the following 13 games, so the last 13 games of the season, okay, he goes on to average 125. Awesome.
Massive, yeah.
Guess how many tackles he averages in that
probably similar. I'd say maybe 8.
It's pretty close to identical.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking, because the narrative is he cuddles. And yes, 100% he does.
Yeah.
Those tackle numbers are ridiculous for a ruckman.
Yeah.
You can't go back and find a ruckman that's done that.
Yeah.
But it just made me think, well, the points have come from elsewhere.
Yeah.
So where have the points come from? In the early sample, the 10 games, he was averaging 1.7 marks. And then he increased that to 4 marks in the following 13, like the last 13 games of the season. And then he also went from 15 possessions to 20 possessions.
Right.
In that breakdown, first 10 games versus second 13 games.
Yeah.
So it just made me think, like, tackles for me, the way he gets his tackles, that's sustainable, even though it's a crazy number.
I actually think it is too, yeah.
So I'm not questioning the sustainability of the tackles, even though it's a historically good number for a ruckman.
I think he's historically good at tackling.
Yeah, but for me, is there a chance that he doesn't quite get as many possessions or that he doesn't quite clunk as many marks? I actually think, there is a chance.
I think so, and the narrative might be, did North improve? And is the ball pinging around quicker because that they're moving the ball a bit more freely, that they don't have to rely on a Tristan Xerri to stand there and take those marks?
His hands were so sticky at the last portion of the season, and there's every chance that they remain sticky. But
some of that could be matchup based as well. Like a lot of the matchups at the end of the season were better than they were at the start of the season. And again, we return to the tit.
Please do.
Yeah. North Melbourne, they have a tough matchup to start off. So they start with the Bulldogs and Tim English. That's a good matchup. But then they go against Max and Melbourne.
Yeah.
Adelaide, who are restrictive in terms of marking. Sydney was the second hardest ruck matchup for the season last year. Gold Coast and Wits is never an easy matchup before finally versing Carlton, which is a bit easier. But so you're sort of looking at 3 or 4 of those first 6 games as being tougher matchups. Compared to what St Kilda had, I think there's a very realistic scenario where Rowan Marshall's averaging like 10 more points than a Tristan Xerri in the first 6 games.
It just got me thinking, that's all. It just got me thinking, especially because there's, if you're not going for a quote-unquote set-and-forget ruck strategy, then you're probably picking between Marshall and Xerri.
Yeah.
And I just thought, if this guy, and I'm not knocking at all what he did in the season, it was amazing, but if he comes out and just does that 10-game stretch of averaging 100, that's a bad pick to start the season.
Yeah. The other thing I researched, because it's interesting you went with the marks, I went with the game style of North Melbourne and having a look at what they were doing. So North Melbourne seemed to get more contested the further the season went on. So, and it correlated with his scoring. So in the at North Melbourne's first 13 games, they had 94 ruck contests per game, which was basically bottom 5.
Yeah.
Then the last 10 games, they went at 100 ruck contests per game. And in the last 5, they went at 105, which was the second highest over that stretch. So
did it coincide with teams that they played, potentially?
Potentially. So they did verse some higher contested teams in that time. But in that time, again, those first 13 games, 105. And that's what I thought he was going to be going into the season. Yep. That's what I had him pegged at. And that's where I traded him out, thinking, okay, he's 105. I got Aaron Marshall. Anyway, that's my sob story. The last 10 games, he went 126.9. And then the last 5, he went 141. Obviously, 141 is not sustainable. But is the 126.9 to do with just the matchups? Is it to do with the increase in ruck contests? The other thing I do remember from last season is North Melbourne getting praise from general media pundits about their contested game being better. Like they played a better brand of footy with it being more contested, which I think flies in the face of the general consensus of a team improving. You kind of think of a team, I don't know, the ball moving around a little bit more, the ruck being less involved on a better team, which I semi-subscribe to, but I think it's that question of, we talk about Rowan Marshall. He scores with St Kilda being the second lowest ruck contest team.
Yeah.
Well, Tristan Xerri seems to be very much correlated with the amount of ruck contests and his scoring. I think that's where you talked about him averaging 5 more disposals per game. I think that's where it came from. The ball just living in those contests a bit more.
Half of them are probably him taking it out of the ruck.
Yeah,
he does love doing that.
Just doing a few of those. So
you mentioned that really good run that he finished the year on. So he's played West Coast, Richmond, and Geelong.
Yeah.
So all excellent matchups. But then I think he also played. Did he play Carlton with?
I think no Tom de Koning.
Was it no?
Or one of them was out.
Yeah.
I think.
So in that kind of stretch as well. So
there was a few times where he had some number 1 guys go down and had a few lucky runs.
Yeah, there's some inflated numbers. Look, I had to, when I was researching it, I was trying to talk myself out of it, if that makes sense, because I got him in the team. I wanted him in the team. I was like, how can I convince myself that this is not a good pick, just to try and...
See, I had Tristan Xerri in my team for a long time and was keen on him over Marshall in drafts. I don't know if I'm there anymore. I'm more confused than I was at the start.
Marshall's got 2 years of it.
He's got a bigger sample size. He's got a better run to start the year. He's got a better bye round, and he's doing it a team that doesn't need the ruck contests. There's no only upside from there. He's got more players coming into his side that we are expecting to jump up as well. The Tom Campbell effect, whether or not that's real, this new SSP guy, how much is he actually going to be in the team? We don't know, but the other thing with Tristan Xerri, there's no one to contend for his ruck contest. There's zero competition for him. He's going to be the number 1 ruck. So from that point of view, he's a little bit safer, but I think the decision between the two is actually pretty tough, and I still don't really know where I would go. But
it's a great one for the comments below, I reckon.
Yeah, let us know if you're Team Xerri or Team Roma. Let's go to Maxi Gawn, who was the ruckman for the first half of the year last year. Finished averaging, what did he average? 112. But if you take out that injury-affected game, he was basically 114 over the 20 games. Back to vintage Max. Is he now, though, just getting a bit too old for us to start with?
Yeah, I mean, age maybe, but I think that there's other things at play here. I just think he's fairly priced. Even if you take out that injured game and you said sort of 3 points of upside. It was a career high year for him last year. If you go back and have a look at his numbers by 0.5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Fact check me there. But I just think he's fairly priced. Maybe
by 1.1.
Maybe there's a slight regression, and even if there's not, if he kind of performs that, it's not bad. But we've got these other ruckman around that similar price that can do damage too. So not one that I've looked at.
Yeah, I think, look, it's interesting because, again, a lot of times you catch people thinking like the second half. What are they doing in the second half? And they use that to correlate and translate to what they expect them to do the following year. I mean, why do we do that? I mean, what about the first half? Does the first half not matter as much? Because in the first half of last year, he was going gangbusters. Like, he had some of the highest ceiling games at the beginning of the year. If we go up into his bye, he was averaging 121.4 in 13 games, 85% time on ground. There's a scenario where he does that again. I think I would bet against it just because he is, 32, turning 33, I want to say.
He had strong shoulders last year too. He was dead set carrying the hopes
Melbourne,
of that entire football club.
And
there were points where he looked tired.
He did. He looked like they needed to give him some help.
Yep.
They don't have a bad run, Melbourne do, but they don't necessarily have a great run. GWS, North, Gold Coast, Geelong is their first easy matchup, but then it's straight away followed by Essendon, who was the toughest matchup for Rucks last season because they don't play any ruck contests, and then Freo. So it's a middle of the pack run. And again, but Melbourne don't have the early bye. So all of these ruckmans we're going to talk about, none of them have the early bye. I mean, there's not really any that I think we should be discussing. Much different to last year, where those, Grundy and Gawn both had the early bye we had to worry about. This year, it's all cleared up for them. I think going a Max Gawn seems like a pick for the sake of being different to Xerri or Marshall.
Yeah.
It feels like you're trying to just be a little cute.
And I just don't know whether it's going to work in your favour, and even if it does, by how much.
Yeah, I think there's a chance he outscores those other two, but I don't think it's going to be by much. And I think the downside is substantially lower than the other two.
Speaking of being cute, you've just told me that Tim English is now sitting at R1 for you. Before you go and reveal your thought process, can I have a bit of a guess?
Yeah. Hit me with your thoughts on Tim English.
At the moment, there's a narrative, and I think there's some truth to the narrative that Tim English was impacted by a change in ruck rule.
Yeah.
And I think there's like an element of truth to that. So if we talk about the change of ruck rule being that it impacted his hit-outs and his ability to contest in ruck contests, well, his hit-outs were only down 4 on last year, and they were actually up on the year before. So he's down 4 hit-outs, so there's 4 points. So I thought to myself, well, he was down more than 4 points. Where did the rest of the points come from? So he was down half a tackle. There's 2 extra points, so we're at 6. And he's also down close to 2.5 kicks.
That's the big one.
So that to me is like, okay, well, 2.5 kicks is let's call it 7 points. Now suddenly we've accounted for his, what was it, a
14-point drop.
Yeah. But only 4 of them were hit-outs. So I just don't know.
Yeah.
Saying all that, I still don't know if I have confidence for him to go back to being that guy. But is that something you found as well?
Yeah, I mean, you're sort of spitting out the stuff that I have here. I found Tim English the most fascinating player to research here because there were so many little elements to his game that fell off. And discovering why that is, I think is more challenging than I first thought. His CBAs went down 2%. From 84 to 82. Because initially I thought, okay, yeah, they had Sam Darcy come in and he was taking a bit of his time. Not really, 2% CBAs. His time on ground went from 86 to 85%. It's the points per minute that went down. And it was just those little things. The biggest thing to me and the most... the thing I think that has the biggest room to change were those kicks that you mentioned. So you go down 2.5 kicks per game?
2.3, but... Yeah,
so...
in that.
That tells me that they're just not using him as much. You can talk about the ruck contest and things like that, and his ruck contest win percentage was down slightly. But the other thing that also changed was the Bulldogs fell from 102.7 in ruck contest, which was second, to 97.7. So they lost 5 ruck contests per game. That dropped them down to 6th in the competition. So we talked about Rowan Marshall and St Kilda, only way up. The Bulldogs year before, only way was down. So they dropped down in the ruck contest. But yeah, the kicks, the marks also coming down as well, I think are the most interesting. Why do you think that they went away from using Tim English as much as they did? Because that was his thing. The other thing I also found in 2023, and let's also remind people, he was the number 1 averaging player in the game. So anytime you have the number 1 averaging player in the game from a year prior, 14 points cheaper, I think you have to look at that player. He has no early bye. This player, if he went out and was the number 1 averaging player this season, you would not be shocked at all because he did it literally one season before. Last year, he had 2 games where he had 20 disposals or more. The year before, he had, what did he have? Where are my stats here? I've lost it. 12. He had 12. So he had 10 more games that were 20 more disposals. Like, that's a massive, massive change. More than half of his games the year before were 20 plus. But last year, just 2. So I think his disposal number is the biggest thing that changed for me. And I don't really know why. Why did they move away from using Tim English?
Whether it's a distinct move away or whether it's just a coincidental thing, that the trouble is that you're asking yourself why and that you don't know why. And to me, that's enough to say you don't pick that guy.
Yeah. He moved, his possessions were actually more down in the contested possessions from 9.2 to 6.9. His uncontested possessions just went down from 11 to 10. So potentially it was just the fact that he just wasn't as good.
Just been meek at the contest.
Yeah, his name's English. He's not meek.
Oh, he plays for Hawthorn, right?
Yeah, he plays for Hawthorn.
I was trying to throw you the alley.
I kind of put you a little bit of fumble. So is that just him being a little bit worse off than his career best year? And does that mean that last year was maybe a flaw and he could be anywhere between the two things?
Yeah, there's every chance it is. And I think that 2023 could just be an outlier.
This is an interesting question. If you started with Tim English, would you be willing to captain him in the first 3-4 rounds of the season without much data?
What does the tit tell me?
What does the tit tell you?
What does the table indicating toughness tell me?
The table indicating toughness says that he goes North, then Collingwood, Carlton, Freo, which are all pretty solid. Brisbane is his first hard matchup.
If his worry is contested possessions, then I think the big X-Man in the first one's going to absolutely destroy him.
He'll hurt him. Yeah, but he'll get it around the ground as well.
The answer's no. I wouldn't be confident putting.
You wouldn't be confident because I think that's a big point. If you're paying for Tim English, I think you'd want him to be a captain option for you.
He will not stay at Mitchland.
I don't know. It was kind of a situation where he was the best I could afford with every other pick.
That's a horrible way of doing it.
But there's something
you would
to
even
it.
admit that's a horrible way of doing it.
I think there's upside. I think there's definitely upside. You don't average 118 points for no reason. He averaged more than any other player did last year, the year before.
That's outlier stuff. That's ceiling stuff. That's like players are good. Players will be 110.
He's 27. He's 2 years younger than Rowan Marshall. He's a year older than Tristan Xerri.
I think players pretty much will be like, they'll be consistent 110s. They can be consistent 110s, but I don't think you're going to be a consistent 118.
If he's priced at 104, which he is, 104.5, do you think he can go 110?
I think he can.
Which is still 8 points down from his year before.
Nah, you're selling yourself. You're not even trying to sell me anymore.
I think there's something there. I wouldn't rule him out just yet. All right, let's go to the next guy.
We haven't even got to the spicy guys yet.
The spicy guys. Well, let's talk about one of the spicy guys, Tom de Koning, who I'm championing this season. I'm pretty keen on him.
I barely have notes here because I just wanted you to go ham.
So the big thing for me is, if we were to simplify...
Please do. I love simplification.
Simplification. What makes a good breakout for the Rucks? It's a ruck going from having a dual ruck setup to being a solo ruck.
They don't like sharing.
Tristan Xerri. Max Gawn.
Tristan not sharing.
Tristan not sharing. Max Gawn. Tim English, even when Stephen Martin was there. Rowan Marshall.
Yeah.
All these players that had the big breakout, the number one reason that they did that is because they were sharing the ruck role to being solo. Tom de Koning, to me, is the only player really this season that fits that bill. And the stats in terms of Carlton's performance support it.
Yeah. Is this your stat?
This is my stat.
You're claiming this stat?
I am. I tweeted this out.
Else
no, this was pre-Christmas, mate. This is my stat. I started this.
Okay.
I hope. At least in my little circle. But 9-1. 9-1 was Carlton when Tom de Koning played solo ruck. That even includes a game where he got injured in the third quarter. So, and the one game that they did lose to was GWS. On the flip side, when Mark Pitnet played, they were 4-10. And
the pits.
They were in the pits. And 2 of those wins were against West Coast and Richmond. So, and one game was a win by 1 point. The other, not against those two. So they just scraped by. They just scraped by. So to me, it has everything to do with Carlton being a better side, structured up with Tom de Koning as their sole ruck, with Harry Mackay pinch hitting as the second, the tall forward there. And when he plays solo ruck, he's 100 plus averaging player. And I think when you price under 90 and you have the potential to go 100 plus, even in low time on ground, there's a lot of upside there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, talk to me about injuries too, because the poor bloke's only got one lung.
One lung?
After last year. Didn't he have a punctured lung?
Your memory's better than me, but he did get injured a few times last year. I don't actually remember exactly what they were.
I'll have to fact check myself.
So, yeah, fact check me on that one. But he did have a few injury-affected games. So, in round 19, he only played 69% time on ground, scored a 61, and then didn't play again until the finals, where, again, he only played 50% time on ground, had a 59. He also had a game in round 10. I don't exactly, someone needs to find this game, but he scored 18 points on 68% time on ground. So to me, that means he must have been injured. Played 17% CBAs, so wasn't in the centre bounces really at all. So I'm assuming that was an injury-affected game in that one as well.
It's a contract year for him.
It is. There's a lot of talk about him getting a big contract.
Correct, whether it's at Carlton or whether it's away. So he's going to obviously be wanting to impress. But the other thing that I think might give your argument some momentum as well is the fact that Carlton are going to want him to be a big dog in their system and know how important he is to them. So I think that they'll be doing everything that they can to say, hey, bro, here's the keys. Get at it.
He's got a good tit as well to start the year.
I haven't seen him with his shirt off, actually.
Yeah, no, but yeah, I can't even remember what it stands for.
A table indicating toughness.
Table indicating toughness.
No copyright issues at
absolutely,
all. It's very
absolutely
different to anything else you'll hear out there.
If you could name one team you would like to start the season versing, what would it be?
For a Rucks?
For anyone, really. But for Rucks, yeah.
Well, for anyone, it's Richmond.
It's Richmond. I mean, Geelong.
Rucks, it might be Geelong.
Geelong might be the other argument. But Richmond is his first matchup. Obviously, the perennial sort of opening round matchup before opening round.
Nank might puncture his other lung.
I
hope he actually
Nank won't be able to keep up with him. And he's a Tim English type ruckman. Like, he's not a guy
mobile.
He's mobile. He doesn't rely on the hit outs or the tackles. He gets it in a variety of different ways. Very high disposal ruckman. But he starts with Richmond, Hawthorn versus Tim English in round 3. Collingwood, West Coast is another awesome matchup, and North Melbourne. So you've got 3 positive matchups in there. Collingwood is actually the only sort of semi-hard one in there, with Hawthorn and North being sort of neutral. So good run to start the year. I believe after that he's also got a few other good ones. The other thing is his time on ground, probably because of the injuries, his time on ground is really quite low. Do you know what the average time on ground for a solo ruck is? I did this research. If you just threw a number out there.
Somewhere between 85 and 90?
Not quite that high, but the average time on ground, and I included Tom Koning in this, is 81% time on ground. He averaged 75% time on ground last year.
Okay.
So if I brought that time on ground up to 81...
If you take the injuries out, does it?
Take the injuries out. If I take the injuries out, I include his points per minute as a solo ruck, increase his time on ground to 81%, he averages 109.
Numbers are good.
Those are good numbers. Now,
succulent numbers.
I've manipulated the shit out of those numbers.
Oh, go ahead.
But to me, that gives me a true ceiling for a player as young and as good as he is. And his points per minute were very close to Tristan Xerri's the year before he broke out. I can see the same thing happening with Tom. The risk is that he isn't the actual solo ruck. That is the risk.
Yeah. And
maybe we're a year early.
We should hopefully know that.
I think so.
The completion of the preseason. Can I talk about something now, or can we talk about something now that I think will apply to him and the rest of the guys that we talk about? Something that I don't think gets enough airtime with the Rucks is pivotability, I'm going to call it.
Pivotability.
Because if you get a guy that is underpriced, mid-priced, let's say, in any other line...
You got an abundance of other options.
Yeah, pivotable players. You can go down to popping rookies or other popping mid-prices. It doesn't happen that way in the Rucks. You have 2 positions to fill, but you barely have any players to fill them. So,
yeah, I mean, there's 18 teams. If anyone played a solo ruck, you've got 18 options to choose from, and not all teams play a solo ruck. So you've only got maybe, 10 to 12 options to choose from?
So it might apply slightly less with Koning, but with the guys that we're about to talk about, to me, that scares me.
That starts to become... So Koning is 300k, I think, away from Tristan Xerri, which is still probably doable as a one-up, one-down. Like, you go a mid-pricer to a rookie, you get him up to a big dog. I think that's doable, but you're starting to push the limit a little bit.
Yeah,
in a one-to-one move.
And anyone who's talking about potentially starting 2 mid-price rucks, it scares me a little bit because... you could end up, your season could be taken away from you very early on if things do go wrong.
It's the same thing like last year where like I didn't want to start with Matt Crouch, Ollie Wines, and Nick Martin. Like, I didn't want to start with all three because for all three of them to go well, the likelihood is just less. So starting with 2 mid-price ruckmen for both of them to go well, it's just hedging your bets a little bit. You would expect one of them to fail.
You could find yourself, unfortunately, just kind of like flip-flopping between shit.
People do it every year, all the time. Yeah, it happens more often than it should.
And if you're doing that, and Rowan Marshall, Tristan Xerri, Max Gawn, Tim English,
150s,
you're just not going to make that up.
Yeah, it is tough. So I do understand your point here. Let's talk about the next guy here who, shout out to Bales, interview with him and I came out this week. That was before Christmas. I talked about Jordan Sweet as a player who initially, when the game opened, I thought there could be a bit of value here. I think before going into it, I remembered it a lot different to how it actually was.
Yeah.
Because he actually played plenty of games in the back half of last season where he was the solo ruck.
And it wasn't impressive.
And it wasn't that impressive.
I think the way you remember it is him being relevant at a particular point in the season, and then you think, oh, maybe there's still some relevance there. But I found the exact same thing in my research.
I think there's been a bit of talk about Jordan Sweet, and I would encourage people to go back and look at the numbers. Like, we actually have a fair sample size of him being a solo ruck. Basically, from round 15 to the end of the season, he played solo ruck. And in that time, if I just quickly look at it here, he averaged mid-80s. In fact, he averaged exactly 84.4 with 81% time on ground. That's that average solo ruck time. Basically, 82% CBAs. So that, to me, is what he is. When he's priced at... What's he priced at? Old mate Sweetie. He's priced at 81.5. Okay, you got maybe 4 points of upside there. It's not enough for me. I don't think there was really much more for me to look into with Jordan Sweet there. I think the memory of what he did is not reflected in the numbers. And I'm worried. I'm thinking people might be getting caught up in that sort of, we remember him being good and this points per minute player, but it actually just doesn't show up.
A guy that you have been on in previous years at certain points is Big Shawnee Darcy from Freo.
Big Shrek.
He's coming in at, is that the nickname? Is it Shrek?
I think that's the Supercoach nickname. I think I've heard it in the Supercoach world.
You can
see the resemblance.
What?
Shrek and Shawn Darcy.
Yes, yeah, sorry.
Less so this year. He's slim.
Is he slim? I haven't seen photos.
Yeah, anyway.
But is he discounted enough to entertain?
He's discounted. He definitely is discounted. I think there's more here than there is to a Jordan Sweet. Priced at, if I bring him up, priced at 77 or 78. He's gone mid-90s before. He's had stretches going 100 plus. He obviously shares the role with a Luke Jackson. However, it seems like Freo leaning away from Luke Jackson playing the main ruck role. Even if we just took last year's games, he averaged 84 in non-affected injury games. So straight away, you've got sort of like 7 points of upside there, just based on last year alone. That was at 77% time on ground. He's been an 80, 81% time on ground guy normally, and then those are the years where he went basically 90 to 95. So if you pick Shawn Darcy, he goes 95. That's like, 17, 18 points of value? I think that's pretty good.
And it's enough to then get you to that leapfrog to go to one of those big dog guys, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of, not really, this is a terrible segue, but speaking of tits,
Wait, were we?
No, we weren't.
You were thinking about it.
I was thinking about it, like I am every podcast.
My.
They've got a very positive matchup with a couple of tough ones in there. So they've got no neutral matchups in the first 6. It's either positive or it's tough. So they got Geelong. Great. Speaking about number 1 matchup for Rucks, first up, Geelong Freo.
Beautiful.
Sydney, second hardest matchup against Brodie Grundy. West Coast, third best ruck matchup. You got the Bulldogs, which is pretty good. Tim English, he gives up some points. Okay. It's positive. Okay. Then you've got...
Give up some hitouts to Shawnee Darcy.
Yeah, and then you've got Richmond.
Oh.
Second best. So he's got the 3 easiest matchups in the first 5 weeks for Ruckman. And then week 6, Melbourne. He goes up against Max Gawn. Okay, so very positive with a couple of tough ones in there. So bit of a mixed bag. Overall, I think it's a positive matchup for him.
Yeah. If TDK falls through, this is one that I start to entertain, but it is a bit down that pecking order of where my head's at.
You don't envision yourself starting Tom de Koning and Shawnee Das?
No, sir.
No. And is that just I don't know where to go if one of them or both of them fail?
Yeah, I wouldn't like the feeling of having my season taken away from me straight away. And I know things have to go wrong to make that happen, but imagine sitting there at week 4 or 5 and thinking, I've got 2 ruckmen that are underperforming because they were somewhat speculative mid-prices, and, well, why bother showing up for a podcast?
Yeah, there's always that. Because the thing is, okay, one of them flops.
Yep.
All right, players flop all the time. You just go to the next guy. If both of them flop and you've got to get rid of both of them maybe on the 1 week, where do you go? What do you do?
Even if both of them flop in consecutive weeks, you've got to make 2 extremely aggressive trades to get the amount of cash to get to a guy.
So it just limits your pivotability. And puts you in a hole that you don't necessarily have to be in. So I do tend to agree with you. I want at least one of my ruckmen to be that 100-plus averaging player.
And we've seen
Tim English up.
Well, let's say even if you've got Rowan Marshall and then you've got Tom de Koning there. So even if Rowan Marshall doesn't start the season exactly how we might have liked, he's a guy that on any given week can just turn around and give you a 160.
Yeah.
So it sucked last year that he dropped 2 sort of 70 scores.
There was some injury things. And at the same time, Jordan Sweet was coming along.
Yeah, people jumped off. But I think that even if you pay up for that big guy and he's not quite hitting 130s every week, you still feel confident that you might get that captainable score, especially with the run that, like we said, Rowan Marshall has to start the year.
Yeah. So I agree. Sean Darcy is someone that I think you can consider, but I think it's Sean Darcy or Tom de Koning. At the moment, I'm leaning Tom. I don't love the idea of starting both, just personally for flexibility reasons. And I think it sounds like you're in the same camp. The ruck 1 position for me, could you see yourself starting neither of those players and going the set and forget? Because this is, I can't believe we've gone 40 minutes into a podcast and not said the word set and forget when we're talking about rucks.
I think I snuck it in there once.
But what is the set and forget something that you would entertain this year? Is it dependent on what these guys are doing? Is it something you want to avoid if you can? Where's your head at with set and forget?
Well, here's a thought. Have an iteration of your team that has a set and forget ruck combination. Because if you go your whole preseason thinking, I'll probably get de Koning, I'll probably get Darcy, and neither of those eventuate, suddenly de Koning's injured, Pitnet's in, suddenly Darcy's injured, same thing, and you've never experimented with an iteration of your team that has set and forget, well, you've done yourself a disservice, haven't you?
Yeah.
So I think that there's definitely...
Because it is a massive restructure. There's a lot of cash being tied up in that.
So just experiment with... we all love just playing around with our teams and tinkering. Start with set and forget and see what you can do around it.
Yeah. I think both, and the opposite applies as well.
Yep.
Figure out, okay, if I do go down to one of these cheaper rucks, what can I do with my team? Can I get another rookie off the field? Can I afford this other guy that I wanted but I couldn't quite afford last time? So
don't get stuck trying to be open-minded with it, I guess.
Yeah. So I think that's a good bit of advice to finish on. Let us know who are your rucks sitting at your team currently. Do you have Tim English like myself? Are you a big set and forget guy, or are you going value? Let us know down in the comment section below on YouTube. Give us a 5-star rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe, and we will see you guys soon for maybe a bit of a team reveal. Bye!